School is in, but are you really ready to learn? Open your eyes to a new day in education with the Awakening Educator, a program specifically designed to explore a new, mindful way of educating our youth. Learn about social-emotional learning, new modalities of teaching, and the most relevant topics in education with your hosts, Susan Andrian and Megan Sweet. Susan and Megan will take you inside the issues by looking at them from different points of view, from policies and research to teaching models that are actually used in schools. There's never a dull moment in this classroom. Have any questions you'd like to ask? Maybe you have knowledge you'd like to share, and share your thoughts live on air. Grab a pen and paper and get ready to open your textbooks and minds to a new way of learning on the Awakening Educator.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Awakening Educator. I'm so excited to have you all here today. This is Megan Sweet, my co-host, and lovely friend Susan will be joining us a little bit later into this show. Today, we have the ultimate pleasure of welcoming Dr. Samuel Nix, the Chief of Schools of Texas Duncanville Independent School District. Dr. Nix is an award-winning educator, and he has worked at multiple levels in the education system as a teacher, coach, assistant principal, and principal. And under his leadership, his school achieved the status of National Model School and ranked in the top 10% of comparable schools in Texas. Dr. Nix believes in empowering methods that prioritize student learning and expertise and create extraordinary results for all. And you can learn more about him, although we'll be talking with him for this whole time, at www.snix3consulting.com. So welcome, Dr. Nix. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Megan, the pleasure is absolutely all mine, and I am so excited to join you today, and it's an honor to be on your podcast. So thank you for having me.
So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your education career. I love hearing how people get started and where they landed. So maybe you can round out that very impressive bio with just a little bit more about yourself and what keeps you going in education.
Well, Megan, thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. You know, Megan, I was very fortunate, Megan. You hear these stories about these individuals that really have it rough coming up, and man, I just don't relate. You know, I'm thankful, I'm blessed. I had two amazing parents in the household, both well educated. My sister and I were in a situation where all of our needs were met, and we're just so thankful for that.
Mm-hmm.
But even in that situation, I being basically an AB student in school, Megan, I struggled. I struggled with my fourth grade teacher who wanted to put me in special ed. I struggled with my sixth grade teacher who told me that I would not be anything. I struggled with my ninth grade coach who told me that I would never play, I'd never see the field, and the best thing for me to do would be to quit. I struggled when I didn't see any administrators in leadership that looked like me in the school that I matriculated through. I was able to go home with two supportive parents who instilled a foundation in me, and I hated school. So what chance did my friends have that didn't have the father at home, didn't have the stable home and all of the needs met to come home to where they had that empowerment and that investment, and that no matter what was being said to them, they were pouring into them. And so I didn't want anything to do with school, Megan.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't. When I graduated, I went to work for the railroad. I went to work for Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad here in Temple, Texas. And I worked there for several years, until it was revealed to me through, just life has a way of revealing things to you, right? That I needed to get back and get an education. And Megan, much like you, and much like the purpose of this podcast, there's more to it than I want to teach, or I want to be a principal, or I want to be an assistant principal, right? There's a purpose, there's a calling, there's a reason. And so being a teacher and going through the classes to become a teacher, I saw very quickly that there was a need, Megan. And much like you, I'm sure much like many of our listeners, our goal is to do our best to plug that gap, to meet that need. Um, and so for me, it was uh, being an assistant principal of a middle school, over 1,000 something kids. It was getting the call to be a principal at the age of 29 for the second lowest performing school in our district. And this particular district had over 64,000 kids, and seeing success there. And then eventually becoming a high school principal for a period of 5 years, where we were named as one of the top urban schools in America, top 32 schools in America for closing the achievement gaps, and then having the privilege to serve as chief of schools here in the district that I serve in, where we have one of the largest high schools in the nation, with our high school housing a little under 5,000 students in one building.
Ooh.
So that's a lot, but that's the journey that I was on. And thank you for allowing me to share.
Yeah, I appreciate you. I mean, there's so much that I want to unpack with what you just shared. I mean, one of them, and it's something I wrote a book also, and I'd love to get into your book, but I wrote a book, and one of the things that I really tried to emphasize in that book was be careful how you talk to kids and the way you set them up for their sense of who they are and what's possible. I think sometimes as teachers, we don't realize the impact we have and how much those things that we say can really set the tone for how we interact in the world and how we see ourselves and what's possible. And when we layer implicit bias and white supremacy and some of the other structures that are a real challenge, to put it lightly, in our country, then we create the situation where a lot of students are told from the very beginning of their lives that they might as well not bother going to school or trying to achieve. And it creates a lot of this, we talk about the school-to-prison pipeline. I mean, that's where it begins, right? With these things that we say to each other. And I'm not trying to be critical of teachers, because I was a teacher for a long time and a school administrator, and I'm sure I said something very harmful to someone, not intentionally, but because we're humans and we say things, but so that we can be ever more aware of the impact that can have on our students. I have a similar story to you as well, which is I was told from the beginning that I might as well not go to school, that I wasn't, that I was a kid. I got into a lot of trouble in school, that I wasn't, school material.
Not you, Megan, not you.
Yeah. Well, always. I mean, that's the thing kids don't know. Most teachers have a past. And often we weren't the greatest students. And I definitely wasn't one. And I taught middle school, which was perfect for me because that was, it's about my developmental level still probably. But I remember my guidance counselor in high school just basically saying, don't bother going to school. You're not college going material. And for me, that lit a fire in me. I was like, oh, okay. Is that what you want to say to me? Let's talk. And I did all the school. So did all the way up through the end. And that message was catalyzing for me, but it's not always for kids. And so I'm wondering how those messages that you heard from the adults, I heard that, initially you're like, well, I'm just going to get out of school and I'm not going to go back. But did it affect your sense of self as you were going through school? To what do you attribute it? I'm making the bold assumption that it's based on implicit bias, but I'd love to hear from you what you would attribute that to.
Megan, one of the biggest lies that I was ever told coming up, and I memorized this as a nursery rhyme, or I don't know if it's a nursery rhyme, but things that kids repeat. And it was the biggest lie I was ever told. And it goes something like this: sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And I was told that, as a young man, to be strong, not to let things get to you, to overcome the challenges of other people's opinions and things of that nature. But the definition of a child is that they're not mature. They're not mature enough to know where to put that, right? They're not mature enough to know where to, how to go through life when someone's telling you that you look up to or that you admire or that has a big impression on your life. And when they say something that has an impact on your self-awareness, on your self-perception, you said it so brilliantly, Megan. You never know. And I love the title of your book. I love how you approached that, because that self-awareness, that self-perception, that, there are people who are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old who never forget that, right? That word, that they're not good enough or that they're not going to make it. So they spend their whole life trying to prove otherwise, trying to make it. So for me, when I had that teacher tell me that, well, you should be in special education, just so happened I was the only African American in my class. So how does that make me feel?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It just so happens when someone tells you that you're not good enough, or you're not going to make it. What, depending on how well you looked at that person or how much influence that person had on you, man, that can have an impact on you. And it did.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my point earlier. I was coming home to two parents that affirmed me.
Mm-hmm.
I was coming home to two parents that taught me how to overcome that and instilled in me foundational principles of things that, but you said implicit bias. I would assume that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that I was that slow, right? My grades referred that, that it wasn't the case, but neither here nor there. The reality is so many of our students, so many people have to overcome the things that they were told or shown or exposed about themselves at a young age that no one ever affirmed. And I'm not a psychologist or anything by that nature, but I do think that we have to overcome so much of that in schools,
Yeah, no,
and
right.
it's so difficult. And so for me, getting into education, it's not just making sure that all students can add or read, right? It is ensuring that all students have a belief in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they get a C in math or not, that is not important to me.
Mm-hmm.
I would like for them to get an A, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what's more important to me is that they believe in themselves, they believe in their potential, and that that belief becomes what they strive to be and to do.
Yeah, I love you saying that. I mean, I feel the same way. I mean, I I spend a lot of time kind of studying beliefs because I think they have such a huge influence on, again, unconsciously oftentimes, but what we're willing to, the risk we're willing to take, how we adjust to and respond to challenges, and we all have them, and how we continue to persevere. So I 100% am with you that that belief, to me, if kids believe in themselves and believe that they can do anything, the grades really mean a lot less to me than that. It's probably maybe not the best teacher sometimes because I just didn't care about those details as much, or administrator. But I wanted kids to have to be affirmed that they could do anything they wanted to do, if they continue to believe in themselves and that they were capable. So I'm really appreciative of that message, and I'm seeing that you wrote a book. And before we even get into the book, I just want to validate how important it is for people like you to be writing books, and like me, but people who've actually been in education at every single level. Because I think oftentimes folks bypass, and I love educational researchers, but this is my own personal bias I'll bring forward, which is like educational researchers are great. And they spend their time actually not actually in school. So they come in, they drop in, they research something, then they pop back out again, but they're not actually living the day-to-day challenges of being in a school. They don't know what it is to walk in the shoes of a teacher or a school administrator or a district administrator. And when you don't know what it is to walk in those shoes, and then you tell them what to do, or you try and like explain the problems, you're going to miss a nuance that's so vital to the solutions that we need to have to reform our education system. So I'm always looking for people who are legit, and you're absolutely that, because you've had all those roles, and you're able to then see how a system works from those different levels. And you and I are we actually rarely have guests that have that shared background of moving through every single one of those systems. So I too have been a teacher and a school assistant principal and a principal and a central office leader. and the way you understand education, how it rolls out, really changes during that time. And so I'm excited to hear about your approach to education change from that lens. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your book and about your approach. That to me, I'm already going to validate because you have been doing the work. So.
Well, well, absolutely. Thank you, Megan, so much. I appreciate that. So the name of my book is Ensure Educational Success. And the framework that I come to it with is basically it's a tool for educators, mainly educational leaders or leaders in general, for how to approach the work of um, shifting a culture and a mindset.
Mhm.
Now, although that may sound like, what in the world are you talking about? You know, Megan, the hardest thing to do is to help someone shift their mindset. The hardest thing to do is to help someone to change a belief system.
Mhm.
And so, what my book endeavors to do is to help leaders understand how to approach the work in such a way that everyone is aligned in their belief system. Everyone is aligned in how we approach transformational work. I always say, you know, the job of a leader is not to maintain. The job of a leader is not even to improve incrementally. The job of a leader is to transform. And
Mhm.
so I use this analogy. I say, if you're paying someone at a gym and you're paying them to help you work out, do you want them to maintain your body or to improve a little bit or to help you to transform, right? And so this book is just common sense tools and strategies for leaders to transform the school culture from one of focused on one of maintaining or even incremental improvement to one of a true transformation of what students are able and capable to do through teachers and administrative staff. So it's been a joy. I have had an opportunity to work with so many great teammates that have helped me to be able to achieve success. Haven't done anything on my own. Great people, uh, great teammates, and so being able to write about that, being able to write about proven strategies. You know, when you take a school that is so low, being my middle school, and in 1 year take that school to be the second highest performing school in a district, there are some things there that are duplicatable.
Mhm.
And so those are some of the things that we discuss and talk about in the book. And so I'm excited to talk about some of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's shifting beliefs, and I'm looking at the things, the description of your book, and I want to kind of hit every single point really, but helping people to learn to work together and to build trust to me is the most important part of leading a school change. So my background, can I call you Sam or Samuel or Dr. Nix, which is the best?
Sam is absolutely fine. That's what my mom
Cool.
named me. Yeah.
All right. So that's my nephew's name too. So it's one of my favorites.
There you go.
So yeah, I mean, so my main work in the last 15 years has been to lead changes at school settings and in the district settings, and like the strategies. So having a plan is really important. So I always get geek out about strategic planning. But what I find in the places where I've been either a change leader myself or supported others is the presence or absence of trust and this ability to collaborate together and how that affects our ability to do that transformation that you're talking about. Because I think there has to be some level of trust for folks to be willing to step outside of their comfort zone, to try something new, to make a mistake, to fail, to expose their weaknesses, or to really look at what's going right and wrong in the school before they change it. So I'm wondering, and you talk about like this culture of accountability, which for me is a key part of that trust. So how do you start to create a culture of accountability in a school that doesn't turn into finger pointing or gotchas, but also a place where people feel like they want to keep showing up to that gym and pushing themselves through the pain of that physical transformation, the pain of a school transformation. So how do you create that culture of accountability?
Megan, thank you so much for asking that question. A culture of accountability. This is, in my opinion, one of the most important questions that you could have asked. I mean, you asked it right off the bat. I'm going to ask you a question before we start, okay? Now, Megan, you are a seasoned educator. So I'm going to ask you a question, and let's see if this goes right.
Okay.
Okay.
I feel like I might get in trouble already, but I'm ready.
Yeah,
Let's
absolutely, no problem. And listeners, you play along. All right. I believe, Megan, that accountability has gotten a bad rap. I believe that people really don't understand what accountability is. Megan, I ask leaders all the time, what is accountability?
Mhm.
And if you just stop and think, I mean, everyone will think everyone is intelligent that's listening. They'll oh, I know the account. But what is accountability? I ask leaders that all the time, and I get a variety of different answers.
Mhm.
I believe that when you talk about accountability, the default answer is I'm in trouble. It's something that I'm getting in trouble for, right? I'm
Mhm.
being held accountable for something in a way that's punitive. Well, here's what I have. It's what I did, and I've I tell principals all the time, have you done this? And I haven't yet seen a principal that's done this. So here's the question. What's the first thing every student does the first day of school? I don't care whether they're in Dallas, Texas, or whether they're in the Bay Area, Megan. Every student that goes to school the first day, what happens in every single class? I'm talking about the first day of school, every class. What happens, Megan?
We go over the rules. We let
Oh,
them
wait.
know what the
Oh,
expectations are and tell
hey, hey,
them.
hey. So you mean to tell me the first day teachers go over with the students, what they do is they're clear, they're transparent. They say, here's what the expectations are. Here's what the rules are. Here's what happens if you violate the rules. If you choose to do this, your name goes on the board, and this is what that means for you. If you choose to do this, you go to the office, and this is what that means to you. If you choose to do this, you have lunch, and this is what that means. If you choose to all the way up to if you choose this, you get kicked out of school, right? And then the teachers, Megan, have the audacity to send this home to the parents. So the parents are clear about what?
The rules and expectations.
Rules and expectations. And then they even submit it to the principal so the principal is clear about what? Their rules and expectations.
That's right.
I've never seen a parent contact a teacher and say, why are you talking to my student about rules and expectations and being clear about what's going to happen if there's consequences? Are you trying to say that my child's going to get in trouble? Are you trying to say that? The teacher said, no, 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 no. I'm simply establishing transparency and honesty and clarity around what I mean when I say accountability in my classroom. It's amazing, Megan, because I haven't yet seen a principal start the school year off like that with the teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So what ends up happening is, what is accountability? Nobody's clear. And then when you do hold someone accountable, what does that mean for me? Does it mean you're trying to fire me? Does it mean you don't like me? Does it mean that you're after me? Does it mean that, and then there's inconsistency in accountability. This assistant principal may do one thing, and that assistant principal may do another thing, and this principal may, and then what's the clear? So for me, establishing a culture of accountability starts with eliminating the fear of the unknown. We have to be clear about what we're trying to do, how we're doing it, and what that means for you as the person. So, for example, if at the beginning of the school year, a principal were to meet with the staff and say, we're going to go over what it means to be accountable in this organization. So let's discuss what that means. Let's get a common definition of what it means to be accountable in this organization. And then if the principal were to get that discussion going, and it's not an easy discussion, and it's not necessarily anything that's going to take a quick period of time, right? But what if that principal were then to say, I'd like to share with you my tiers of accountability, not because anyone's going to reach the top tier, but I don't want anyone reaching the top tier. So let's be clear about what it is and what this means. First, if there's an expectation, if there's a policy, if there's a procedure and it is violated, the first thing I'm going to do is communicate with you. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to give you an opportunity to ensure that you're clear about it, that you understand it, that's not how we do business, and give you an opportunity to correct that behavior. But if you should choose to continue, here's the next step in that process. And here's how we're going to support you in that. And here's what you can rely on in terms of all of the administrators, the consistency, the trustworthy. Here's what this is going to look like. And this is what this means for you. And if you should so happen to continue in that, here's the third tier of that. And this is what that means for you. And this is the support that you'll be provided, because we're here for kids. We've got to make sure that, Megan, when I used to do this with my teachers, and I would ask them, I would show them examples of, here's what it looks like. Here's what the verbiage looks like. Here's what these things are. Can you give me feedback on what you agree? Can you give me feedback on what you understand? Can you give me feedback? What it did was it broke down the walls of, I don't understand accountability. It broke down the walls of, the inconsistency in accountability. And it broke down the walls of fear of what it means to be held accountable. And we were able to move forward with an expectation that policies, procedures, and rules will be upheld as a standard in our organization. This is what it means to uphold it, and nothing will be done without support. Lastly, and I'm sorry to monopolize the time with this answer, but lastly, I think as leaders, we often look at the person and say, you didn't do A, or B wasn't done, or whatever, but we very rarely look at ourselves. And the first place I think we should look is at ourselves. Were we clear? Did we provide the correct resources and materials? Do we self-reflect when something wasn't done and look at what we could have done better, more effectively, more efficiently before communicating with, documenting, whatever that looks like, this particular individual? And so my book goes through what I call the leadership cycle, to take a leader through all of these different thought processes before we get to accountability.
Thank you for that, Dr. Nix. We're going to take a brief break, and when we come back, Susan will be joining us, and we'll be able to continue on in our conversation. Hi, everyone. This is Megan from the Awakening Educator. I hope you're enjoying this really exciting show. I thought I'd take this opportunity to let you know that if you're interested in education change management, unpacking your beliefs, or understanding how mindfulness and other self-reflection tools can help you to be a stronger educator and advocate for your community, then I invite you to visit my website, www.your3eyes.com. That's YOUR, the number 3, EYES.com. Lots of free resources, tools, and access to trainings to help you to go deeper and to get to know yourself better and be empowered to lead your schools. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We took a brief pause because the lovely Susan Andrian has joined us on the show. I'm so excited for you to be here, Susan. Welcome.
I'm very excited to be here and back and here with you, Sam. I'm excited to hear what you've been doing and about change management, which I know Megan's probably been geeking out with you without me here. So thank you for being on our show.
Thank you for having me, Susan. Absolutely.
So just before you came on, Susan, we were talking about the A word, which is accountability, and it's my favorite word, actually. So the reason why I went there right away, Sam, is that this is what I think is actually the most often lacking for our teachers and school administrators and central office leaders. And Sam made a really good point, right? That when we start school, every day on the first day of school, students are given the rules and expectations of that classroom and talk through what happens if those rules are broken, and those get sent home to the parents and sent to the principal. So they're widely communicated, and really strong teachers consistently enforce them, right? So it's what happens. And Sam was saying that when he started working with his leaders, and in his book, he outlines how to do that for adults as well. And I think it's just crucial, which is, from an assets-based and supportive point of view, but like, here are my expectations for you as a teacher or a school leader or whatever your role is. And here, if you're not meeting these, here's what's going to happen first and next and next.
It's really, I've thought a lot and reflected a lot on some of my biggest failures as a manager or leader or coach. And I think some of the biggest failures for me were not actually holding folks accountable early and clearly, and that in not supporting them by holding that expectation and giving them feedback and really calling them out with love and support early and directly. I failed to support them in their learning growth. And then by the time the problem got so big, it was too difficult to support them in the way back from it. And so it's kind of a gift for our kids as well as for our educators when we can give these real clear accountability from the beginning. And I was just thinking about that in terms of reflecting back on one of the principals I've been working with for years, who we were in a conversation reflecting back, and it's that love and support, that love and accountability.
Yes.
And we're missing that in so many spaces. And often I think it's just because of I'm not really sure why. I don't want to give excuses.
Well, go ahead. Why do you think?
Please, Megan.
No,
so,
please. I told you I'll jump in.
No, you're good. So, Susan, thank you so much for that perspective. And you said, I don't really know why. And I'm not proposing to know the reason why people don't hold people accountable. But what I have seen is you mentioned love and support. Well, in order to support someone, you have to monitor where they are in relation to where they're supposed to be, right? And so that monitoring piece, that feedback piece, that support piece often gets left aside because we're so busy. We have so many things that we need to do. It is very difficult to hold people accountable to all the standards and expectations, whatever the case may be. And because by the time that you, like you said, by the time something happens, right, where's the support been, right? Where's the feedback for improvement? What does that look like? And so that is such a challenge for adults, such a challenge for leaders, period, because we're torn in so many different directions. And if we're not intentional about our thinking process, people will maybe not meet a standard, or maybe be working very intently on something, just not yielding the results. But because we're not monitoring the work, providing the feedback, being reflective on our leadership on what it means to support them, by the time we get there, man, we're in a situation, right?
Well, and it feels bad by then, right? So
yeah.
I know for me, if I've been allowed to carry on for a long period of time doing something that what I'm not supposed to do isn't the right word, but like something that isn't good or is not in support of students. And then suddenly years go past and suddenly someone's giving me that feedback. I'm entrenched in what I've been doing. And I start to get really defensive about suddenly like you feel like the rules have changed or whatever. I mean, for me as a teacher, and I spent 10 years in the classroom, I think I had 3 formal observations in 10 years. So I didn't get feedback on my instruction. I wasn't provided support or guidance. People didn't come into my classroom because I handled my kids in my class, and I never sent any kids to the office. I felt like that was probably the primary marker for how kids were doing or how I was doing as a teacher. Not necessarily my instructional prowess, which was probably shaky because I didn't care about those details. Like I cared about creating a safe and empowering culture in my classroom. And that's what I put my focus on. And that's why my kids didn't leave the room. And so there was something positive there. But I certainly could have used a lot of support on how to be a stronger teacher. I think I did okay. But it would have been great to have someone who had been in the craft for a long time giving me that guidance and support. But instead, it was going to the teachers that were really struggling in the classroom for the most part, and generally struggling with their behavior management. And when I became an administrator, I was like, that's not going to be me. I'm going to be in every classroom. I'm going to be supporting everybody. And I definitely was in classrooms more. So I will say that I scheduled time to be in classrooms to provide that support. But I did still, for sure, spend most of my time in the classrooms where the instruction was challenging, where kids were bouncing out because of behavior problems. I spent much more time there. So I didn't spend, even though I said I was going to, as a school leader, I was going to spend an equal amount of time in every classroom or really empower the strong teachers as much as the ones that needed more support. In actuality, that didn't happen. And I'm a principal right now, and I don't even get into the classrooms. The only classrooms I'm getting into right now are the ones where the teachers need an evaluation because they're moving through a credentialing process and it's mandatory. But otherwise, I've been putting out fires. So it's really hard to get into classrooms and to provide that proactive support, even though I think it's absolutely crucial. And so, yeah, so I'm wondering how you support leaders to start to prioritize that, because enforcing all of the accountability is hard to do in practice. So how do you do it, Sam?
Thank you for asking. I outline exactly how to do it in my book, Ensure Educational Success. Let me start off by giving you some real life data. I don't know if you would agree with me, but there's very few things that are as uncontrollable as being in the air. So for an example, in an airplane, you're pretty much, when that turbulence hits, it's a different feeling because you're not, there's only one way to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
I bring that up because in my book, I talk about what I call the leadership cycle, which is a decision-making matrix for leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And where I got this from is from the airline industry. And what they found was it's something called ADM. And this is research that you can find, and it's, of course, in my book, Aeronautical Decision Making. And what they found was if they trained pilots in the decision-making process using what they called an ADM model, right? What they found was that the reduction in human error of flights went down 42.3%. Now, I don't know about you, but human error in flights means lives saved, right?
Right.
So if we can approach something in a way that reduces error for pilots just by framing how they're preparing, framing how they're thinking, right? Then that's something worth looking into. Same study, they reduced the pilot errors due to weather, which includes crashes and accidents, by 72.3%. Now I want you to pause for a second. Weather's uncontrollable. You can't control thunder. You can't control wind. You can't control rain. These things are uncontrolled. When you are flying, these are things that are impacting you that you have no control over. So you mean to tell me just by helping them think through and process and prepare for in a way that reduced accidents and errors and accidents and crashes by 72.3%? Can we do that as leaders? Can we prepare our hearts and minds? Can we prepare in such a way that the unforeseen, what I'm not going to call weather, but all the things that you mentioned, the parents, the issues, the challenges, all the unforeseen things that are coming to, can we weather that and process and plan strategically in such a way that we're still able to have the impact that we need to have? Mm-hmm. And so that's what I wrote a book about, for how to do that. And I call it the leadership cycle. And so what the leadership cycle is comprised of is this. Number one, am I clear about what I'm trying to accomplish with my people? So I call that clarifying the mission. So going back to accountability, right? Have I clarified the mission, and how well have I done that? And what I found, Susan and Megan, is oftentimes with leaders, when I ask that question, have we clarified the mission? Susan, you know what they tell me? No, I've told the mission. Mm-hmm. I've shared the mission. I've emailed the mission, right? I've sent a note about the mission, but are any of those things clarification?
And it doesn't live a lot of time. My experience in schools is it's something that goes up. It's something that's at the top of the agenda, but it's not alive in the same way that I think you're talking about when you talk about clarifying the mission. And I'm actually curious about this particular moment in time, right, where this has been a particularly difficult, in my 20 years in education, by far every educator I talk to has said, this is too much. This is a lot. This is more than usual, right? This is not a typical thunderstorm. We're in a tornado and a cyclone and whatever else at the same time. And there are some of the sites that I think have clarity, and their teams were there, and their tier one was really, they already sort of had that, and they're still struggling, but they're not drowning. But other sites who had sort of maybe didn't have as many weather bumps throughout the day, but didn't have strong systems and vision. Now that everybody's experiencing challenges, I'm finding those schools are struggling more, schools that wouldn't typically be considered struggling schools. So I'm curious, as you talk about this cycle of mission of preparedness, right? I spend a lot of my work around prevention and tier 1, culture, climate, creating environments that where learning can happen, really consistently getting across the board. And I'm curious about in this moment, how you're working with leaders to be able to shift from reactive to responsive, to planning, to have this clarity as they're going in when there's so much unprecedented. And Megan knows this about me. I've been advocating, and she has too. We've been advocating since the pandemic started. Like, this is it. Let's reimagine. Let's start doing it different. Like, this is, let's really dismantle all of the ways that our current education system is not equitable, is not working, doesn't have creativity, is missing joy. And I was sorely disappointed that didn't happen, but I'm curious how you might incorporate that cycle of thinking and planning into the current moment that we're having, and also the ways that inequity has been continued to persist despite efforts for my entire career. I know that's a small question.
You're awesome, Susan.
Little question.
Yeah, it was a great question.
Solve all the pleas for Sam right now.
Yes, absolutely. So for just for context, when I say prepare, I don't mean that we're going to have the answers for everything that comes. When I say prepare, as a leader of an organization, how you think and process through the problem matters. And so when I say step 1 is clarifying the mission, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, are you clear about it? And how are you ensuring that you're clear about it? When I ask people, leaders especially, how are you ensuring that you're clear? They have to actually pause and think through that, Susan, because they're so used to telling people, sharing with people, emailing people, whatever the case may be, that they're not ensuring that they're clear. You know, the hardest thing to do, Megan, the hardest thing to do is something that you're not clear about. And do you know what teachers and people are doing right now? They're doing things every day, each and every day, that they are not clear about. And we are thinking that we're going to get some kind of outcome from this. So the first step is, as a leader, whatever your mission is, whether it's dealing with PLCs or dealing with inequities or dealing with in tier 1 instruction or whatever it is, whatever that mission is, who are you working with and how are you ensuring clarity? That's the first thing. The second thing in the leadership cycle, it's strategic planning and decision making. Now, Megan, I heard you say strategic planning is your jam, right?
Totally.
And in my book, I talk about
Susan's laughing because that's all I talk about.
There's a difference between planning and being strategic in your planning.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? And who's at the table with that planning? Who's at the table? Who's being impacted by these challenges? And do they have a voice at the table? Are you honoring their voice? Are you thinking through the things that you have control over? And are you thinking through the things that you have no control over? Is that part of the thinking process? Are there options for if this, that, or the third happens? I'm going to pause here because I don't know if you guys are sports fans, but as a football fan, there's a coach that many people feel is the best coach in the NFL, and his name is Bill Belichick. Whether you agree or don't, I'm not saying I agree.
I'm a huge Patriots fan,
Okay,
so I'm
there you
from
go.
Boston.
So I just
and
hit the line here, right?
But Tom Brady
Right.
in this house is
Right?
a god, and the
Like
last
you said,
couple
like
weeks
you
has
said a bad
been.
word, Sam.
There you
just
go.
hit a button
Absolutely.
right now.
This
Don't
is
cut
the
me
one
off,
area
right?
Megan and I are not like total
Okay, got it.
copacetic here.
Not a Bill
Absolutely.
fan over here.
But if you were to just to break it down and just to really think through what makes Bill Belichick so high regarded, right?
He do your job. That's what he said. That's what he
more
says.
than do your job. More than do your job.
It's his cutoff sweatshirt, isn't it?
Yeah, right. More than do your job.
Sorry, Sam, I couldn't help it.
No, you're good. He actually prepares for
Yes.
things that other people don't even think about.
Yes, this is true.
And if anyone interviews Bill Belichick or any players that play for Bill Belichick, they'll tell you he's always in think in prepare mode. What if this happens? What are you gonna do? What if that happens? Well, as a matter of fact, there was a play in the Super Bowl not too long ago where the other team was on the 1 yard line. They were getting ready to run the ball in. They mess around and pass it. And what the player said is, we were prepared for that. What? Huh? What do you mean you're prepared for that? Who prepares you for that, right? Well, Bill Belichick did, because he was very strategic with how he prepared and planned for that. So my whole point in the leadership cycle, number one, are you clarifying the mission? Number two, strategic planning and decision making. What does that look like? Are you clear about it? And of course, we can unpack that if we have time. Number three is empowering yourself and others. And what I mean by empowering people is not giving them information, not giving them a resource, not saying I empowered you because you went to a professional, but what does it mean to empower people? What does it mean to empower yourself? And I have found that we often are trying to accomplish something, no matter what it is. Let's say, Megan, you're trying to get into the classroom, right? And it's so much going on, right? So number one, what's the mission? Are we clear about it? Is everybody clear what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it and what that looks like? Number two, strategically, who are you working with to make sure everyone understands that, is accomplishing that, is working towards that as a collective whole? And number three, what does it mean to be empowered with that? So does your secretary understand what it means when you say, I'm trying to get into class? Do your teachers, do your administrator, what does it mean to be empowered? And I fleshed that out in the book, right? Because empowered people are very dangerous, because they're not just informed, right? It's that whole practice versus theory mindset, right? And then the fourth step in the leadership cycle is it's monitoring and providing feedback. And that's where so many leaders fall out, because we're so busy monitoring it. So we talk about, what does it mean? How do you do it? How do you establish a system to get that done? The fifth step in the leadership cycle is making the proper adjustments based on that feedback, when to do it, how to do it, strategies to do that, right? And then of course, lastly, is a culture of accountability and rewarding. And so the initial question, Susan, that you asked was, in all this shift and all that we have going on, how does preparation help us to deal with the shift? Well, I'm not saying preparation in terms of you're prepared for the unknown, but what you are prepared for is how to navigate through the unknown, right? And then your second question was about inequity and how do we eliminate inequity? I think that was your question. How do we not necessarily limit, but how do we deal with all of that we're dealing with all the inequities that we have, and maybe how do we overcome that? Which I think is a very important question.
My question was partly that, and also that, in the district that, and in my department, right? If for 20 years, we've been trying to tackle the issue of inequity, right? Of disproportionality in special education referrals and suspension referrals and expulsion referrals and academic data. We have an entrenchable equity problem that, despite everything that we have tried in my 20-year career, now we've reduced the number of suspensions, we've reduced the number of expulsions, but the disproportionality persists. And I think it's I agree, we need a strategic approach, and we need to be knowing what are we looking at and what is the data, and how are we going to know if what we're doing is actually having the outcome that we wanted to have. And I think that how you laid it out really makes a lot of sense. And then in the current moment, what I'm experiencing in the current moment is that there's a sense of overwhelm by everybody within the system. So even if we have clear, it might be time to, I think it's clearly a time to reassess what it is that we're doing and redefine our mission in this particular moment, because we're moving forward like it's business as usual, and it feels catastrophic in a lot of ways.
So let me give you an example of what you just said. So in my district, and I know this is being promoted out, maybe I shouldn't say this, right? But I told my principals, here in Texas, we have House Bill 4545. I mean, there's so many things that have been placed on our teachers and educators. So what I told my leaders, I want you focused on one thing. I want you focused on. So what we do going through the process, are they clear about what that is? There are 7 million things to do. But you know the best way not to catch one rabbit, Susan?
Yes.
Yeah, chase
Go
3.
after all of chase
Right.
them all, right?
Right. So we have been chasing all, hoping and thinking and wishing that things are going to change. I've got another thing to say that you may not mesh with and we may not have time to explore, but here I think is an unintended consequence. You mentioned disproportionality.
Mhm.
I think sometimes an unintended consequence of focusing on sub-pops and economically disadvantaged or special ed or whatever the case may be is, for example, your African American scores are low, fix them.
Mhm.
Huh? So an unintended consequence is a belief system in some that may
Yeah.
be, right? Well, they're low because boom, 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 boom. But
Mhm.
now I'm focused on African American score instead of all kids, right? I'm focused on how do you improve an African American score?
Well, I think what it
Yes.
does, I mean, I think for me, sorry, Susan, I think what you're referencing does two things that are problematic. One is when we focus on the deficits, and I saw a lot of your language in there around being assets based. I think that's a really different orientation. So
Mhm.
identity aside, when we focus on what's wrong with kids and what they cannot do,
Absolutely.
then our attention is in the wrong place, right?
Absolutely.
So instead, if we focus on, positive psychology gives us a lot of good information on that. But if we're asset based, okay, what are our African American students or any students able to do well? How can we build on that rather than how are we going to fix this deficit that we've identified?
But our system is not set up that way, is it?
It is not. And when we match that to race, then what we're doing is we're building in a belief system, a structure in our brains that tells us that African American students aren't as strong as. It's not what we're saying, but it builds this correlation that's highly problematic, and I think supports things like disproportionality, because we have this focus that ends up being deficit based and attached to identities that is problematic, rather than how do we build, I think we need to use that data and understand that we're failing groups of students significantly and have for generations, and we need to address that. But how do we do it in a way that doesn't create this link between, or a suggestion that certain groups aren't as effective students, when in reality it's a system that's been built to not be supportive of them.
And I would add on to that, because I agree. And I think that when I look at disproportionality, I know this is because of the lens that I'm coming at it, I don't see it as a deficit of the students. I see it as a deficit of the adults serving those students. What is happening in that system that we're not educating all students to the degree that they can be, that they can engage in learning. And I think it's that bias that you mentioned. So I'm grappling with what you're saying. I want to take it in because I really think that that's important to be listening to where is my language and how is it playing out in that way. And I tend to focus on strength-based. But I also do see that within our district and within our city, that when we look at disproportionality, at least in the circles that I'm in, we're always talking about it as the adults not doing that they're not providing culturally responsive classrooms, that there's bias within the classrooms, that those students are being sent out disproportionately for the same behavior that other students who look differently than they do, that bias plays into the way that we are responding to students. And that is causing the disproportionality. And so I don't know where the answer to that is, but.
No, I think that you are absolutely correct. And so the challenge, as I believe that you have both posed from my perspective, is that you have people who look at this as a student problem, and you have people that look at this as an adult problem. Who's right? And so you have two different camps. And so they address it two different ways. But how do we address this? Number one, we have to identify where is the issue. And in my opinion, Susan, you hit this on the head. And this is why we continue to have a problem, because this is an adaptive issue that we continue to try to put technical solutions to.
Mhm.
Mhm.
This is a belief problem.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And how do you change a belief, Susan?
Well, this is my, I'm the mental health of the
Yeah.
team, and trauma, and I'm shifting even away from the language of trauma for the same deficit
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
language. I'm moving towards stress response system and the physiology of what's happening in our body and the way that we learn. And so from my perspective, we change by having patterned, repetitive, rhythmic, ritual, rewarding relationships, and that education is happening in environments that are rich in relational content and exciting learning, and that we're providing the environments that really are conducive for changing the brain. And when we're talking about changing the brain, we're talking about learning math as well as learning relationship, as we're learning empowerment, that we're trying to change the brain, either the emotional reactive part or the cognitive academic part. So, and that takes relationally mediated interactions.
I love that. And I think that's absolutely appropriate. With that being said, if I have a person that believes
Mhm.
a certain way, how do I change that? How do I get them to understand that how they interact with this child is different from how they interact from this
Mhm.
child? Their tone, their
Mhm.
body language,
Mhm.
their posture, their actions differ from this child. How do I get them, Megan, to change the belief?
Yeah, let us. I mean, I would love to
Yeah.
hear what your thoughts are on that. So, what would you say is how we do that?
Yeah, put it back on me. I'll say that. Right?
Yeah.
Because Susan,
I agree with you, and I think what Susan said is important. And I wasn't just trying to put it back on you, although I would love to hear, because I think
absolutely.
I also get stuck in my own judgments and beliefs about those adults. So as soon as you said that, I had an image in my mind of who I saw.
Mhm.
And then I had a visceral reaction to that person in my mind who I saw, who is creating situations where kids aren't going to be successful.
Yep.
And I have to, and I realize as self-aware leader, I have to work with myself before I work with that person. I have to work with my beliefs on myself before I can have an effective relationship and hold that adult accountable in a way that I need to hold them accountable to support the kid. That's kind of where I end up getting a little bit stuck in my own leadership journey, is how do I work through that? So Jen would love to hear what you think. And it'll probably be the last thing we get to talk about, because we need Sam on for like 5 more shows.
No, thank you so much. So this is not an easy answer. It's not what I'm going to quote unquote say sexy answer, but here's what I believe and here's what I've seen work. Not that this is the bullet, right? But here's what I've seen work. Everything that Megan, you and Susan, you have said, I 100% agree with. You guys are so thoughtful. You're so intentional with your words, and you've been in the work, and so both of you understand what this looks like. With that being said, my opinion, how we change this thing, we don't spend enough time understanding and investing in people based on their experiences.
Yep.
People, it's my opinion that experiences shape beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Beliefs translate into actions, and actions produce results.
Right.
Mhm.
So what we do is take disproportionality. Okay, we're going to put these programs in place. We're going to be restorative. We're going to tell you to be relational. We're going to do it. But none of that changes beliefs.
Mm-mm.
Right.
No, it doesn't.
And so I said before, we attach a technical solution to an adaptive issue.
Mm-hmm.
So for me on my campus, or for the people that I've worked with, or for the people that I support, we spend so much time trying to help people identify their beliefs and then provide them different experiences for which to help change those beliefs. So real quick, I've done this. Now, guys, I know this is going to sound like a lot, and it may sound like an exaggeration, but I'm not exaggerating. There's an exercise that I do I've done with over 1,000 educators. And I give them a sheet of paper with different student faces on the sheet of paper. There's about 8 student faces on the paper. And these students are African American, Caucasian, Hispanic, Asian, different dress, different things. And it's just a piece of paper, and on the top it says, you have to assign a grade of A to D or A to F based on what you think the child averages. And then I tell them there's no trick to this. Just put down what you think the child averages. Thousands, Megan. Thousands, Susan, not hundreds or 20.
I know this
thousands.
is going to break my heart. But I know it is. I know it's going to break my heart, but.
And so I give them about 2 minutes to do. And inevitably, 99% of people assign a B to this child, or a D to this child, or a C to this child, or an A to this child. And then I ask them this: why did you give that student a B? You don't know this student. You've never met this kid. The only thing that you can say is this picture of this child reminds me of someone, or they look like something, or the way that their clothes are. But why did you give this kid a B? Why does the Asian student never get anything under an A or a B? Why does the kid with the 2 earrings, why does he always get an F? Why? What is it in you that gave? Well, they say, well, you told me I had to give a score. Okay, we'll take that. But why did you give this kid an A and this kid a B? What is it in you that assigned that score to that child? The only thing that you can say is that this child generated a thought of a reminder, or sounds like, or looks like, or something, which means that you prejudged this child. In other words, you've just exercised your prejudice.
Right.
When I can get a person at that moment to understand, I have a belief system that I need to work on, then, Susan, we're taking the first step to eradicating inequity, to eradicating. But until we do that, until we can find ways to help people understand where they are, there's levels of denial, there's levels of dismiss, there's levels of, no, this doesn't pertain to me because I love all kids and I'll do whatever it is for kids.
And you did an amazing, that activity, it has them do it, and then you're attaching to emotional experience, right? So because in order to change the belief, it needs to be attached to an emotional shift. Like, they have to feel what they did. They have to, you're bringing it back to them, and then they can feel and see their own bias, and there is no denying it in that moment.
Yeah, I agree with you. Susan, I'm cutting you off also.
Sorry.
Time. So I was feeling a long response, and I love your long responses, and I'm going to cut them.
It's all right. It's okay.
But I will reinforce. I agree with you, and I think that's kind of the premise of what I write about. And Susan and I have talked about this a lot, is that we have to have a willingness. So I have a self-work, schoolwork cycle is what I talk about. But you have to be willing to look at yourself, and be willing to interrogate and acknowledge those beliefs that are there, which I think can be incredibly challenging for people, whether you're judging someone outside of your identity group or within your identity group. I think sometimes it's even harder for me to acknowledge and admit that I have a bias against women or whatever identities I have. So I'm like, well, wait a minute, I am one. I can't. But they're there. And what you named are those implicit biases that influence us. And if we're not willing to see them, then we're not able to change them. And I think as educators, that's our core work right now, is being able to interrogate our beliefs, be curious about them. And it kind of brings us back full circle to what we started talking about, which is this idea of accountability and trust, because we need to be able to have trust to share those sometimes really ugly or painful truths about ourselves and what we think about our kids, in a place that allows us to be safe, but also be held accountable when those start to shift over into impacting kids in a way that can be asset-based to the extent that's possible until it isn't anymore, right? So I think we have seen plenty of teachers that are like, they get this information, they run with it, and they are instantly transformed, and their classrooms are transformed. And then we have some individuals that can't seem to make that shift and are creating environments that are not safe or healthy for kids to be in. And we need to have that accountability on the other end as well, in my belief. and I'm going to give myself the last word. Well, I'm not really. I'm going to give you the last word in just a second, Sam, which is, it's just been such truly, I would love to have you come back for another episode, because I think what you're talking about is exactly what Susan and I talk a lot about, which is how do we, and I love that difference between like focusing on these adaptive challenges rather than like slapping something on top that we're just going to try and change without actually adjusting what's underneath, which is what we need to do. It's been super exciting to talk with you. This is the work that Susan and I care so deeply about. I would love to give you an opportunity to let people know how to connect with you. So if people want to work with you, what's possible? I know you have a book. Can you kind of, how can people find that? How do people find Sam beyond our lovely show here?
First of all, Megan and Susan, you two are amazing. And thank you so much for allowing me the privilege to be on this show. My book is called Ensure Educational Success. And they can find it at Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, anywhere books are sold online. I'd love to share my website, which is www.snix3consulting.com. That's snix3consulting.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Samuel Nix. And so I'm just very thankful that people like you, Megan, and Susan are just in the work, having discussions about real work that impacts students. This show is clicking off in a few seconds, and this will be entertaining for some people. But Susan and Megan, this is not entertainment for you and us. This is life. These are lives. These are people who we wake up every day, and our discussion, our banter, our challenges to each other, our questions, they are in an endeavor to change lives. And so I thank you for the opportunity to engage in this discussion with you. I would look forward to another opportunity, and I would challenge anyone that's out there that's listening or watching. I would challenge them to really reflect on what you believe. What experiences have you had that have shaped those beliefs, and what are you willing to do about it?
That's a beautiful way to end. It's been such an honor to have you on the show, Dr. Nix. We will absolutely put all of the ways to connect with you on our website. And Susan, you came in, you brought the fire. I'm so excited to have you on there. You came in, it was got like immediately the energy shifted up really positively. So it's always such a pleasure to have you on the show.
I'll be in your state on Saturday. I'll be at the Creating Trauma Sensitive Schools Conference in Houston next week. So I'll be in your, I mean, it's a big state, but
bring some of that warm weather with you, Susan. It's cold today.
I'll try. I was looking at that weather every day. I'm like, ooh, why did I leave California? No.
Well, thanks for joining us. I'm going to stop recording in just a moment here.
Class is dismissed. Wasn't that fun? Susan and Megan are always happy to greet you on the next episode of The Awakening Educator. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Education is the foundation for a brighter future. Open your eyes to The Awakening Educator